The rain was coming down hard in Atlanta that Tuesday evening. David pulled his black sedan into the parking lot of Mama Rose's Kitchen, a small restaurant he'd never heard of before today. His driver had recommended it when David asked for somewhere quiet, somewhere nobody would recognize him. David Chen was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the deep exhaustion that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. At 38, he owned 3 tech companies and had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But tonight, sitting alone in his hotel room, he'd felt like the loneliest person on earth. His mother had died 3 months ago. The divorce papers were signed last week, and everywhere he went, people wanted something from him. Money, connections, investments, donations. Nobody just wanted to talk to David the person anymore. So here he was, walking into a soul food restaurant in a part of town his security team would probably hate. The smell of fried chicken and cornbread hit him as soon as he opened the door. It reminded him of his childhood before the money, before everything got complicated. The place was small and warm. Maybe 15 tables, most of them empty on this rainy weeknight. An older woman behind the counter smiled at him. "Welcome, honey. You can sit anywhere you like." David chose a corner table where he could see the door but stay out of sight. He ordered the first thing on the menu without really reading it. Fried catfish, mac and cheese, collard greens. Food his mother used to make before she got sick. He was halfway through his meal when he noticed her. She sat 3 tables away, bent over a thick textbook while eating what looked like the cheapest thing on the menu. A young black woman, maybe mid-20s, with natural hair pulled back and wearing a simple sweater that had seen better days. She was completely focused on her reading, occasionally highlighting something with a yellow marker. David found himself watching her. Not in a creepy way, but with curiosity. She seemed so peaceful, so focused. When was the last time he'd been able to concentrate on anything without his phone buzzing or someone demanding his attention? She looked up from her book and caught him staring. Instead of looking away annoyed like most people would, she smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Sorry," David said, feeling embarrassed. "I didn't mean to stare. You just looked so focused. I was wondering what you were studying." "Social work," she said, closing the book but keeping her finger on the page. "Working on my master's thesis about community development in low-income areas." Not exactly light reading. "Sounds important, though." She laughed, and the sound made something loosen in David's chest. "My friends think I'm crazy. They say I should have gone into business or law, something that pays better. But I want to actually help people, you know?" David nodded, though he wasn't sure he did know. When was the last time he'd done something just to help people? Sure, he donated millions to charity every year, but that was different. That was easy. Writing checks wasn't the same as getting your hands dirty. "I'm Keisha," she said. "David. You eating alone, David?" The question was simple, but something in her tone made it feel like more. Like she'd noticed he looked lonely and actually cared. "Yeah, I'm in town for business. Don't really know anyone here." Keisha looked at him for a long moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "Want some company? I mean, if you don't mind. I've been staring at this book for 2 hours and my brain's starting to hurt." David felt his heart speed up. When was the last time someone had offered him company without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had just been kind? "I'd like that," he said. "If you're sure." Keisha gathered her books and moved to his table. Up close he could see she was even prettier than he'd thought. But it wasn't just her looks. There was something about her energy, her presence, that made him feel calmer. "So what kind of business brings you to Atlanta?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. David hesitated. This was always the moment when things got weird. When people found out who he was, they changed. They started treating him differently, started wanting things. "Tech stuff," he said finally. "Pretty boring?" "I doubt that. Technology changes everything these days. My professor was just talking about how social media is changing the way communities organize. Are you one of those coding genius types?" David almost choked on his sweet tea. If she only knew. Something like that. They talked for over an hour. Keisha told him about her thesis, about growing up in a small town in Georgia, about her dream of opening a community center where kids could get help with homework and job training. David found himself talking about things he hadn't shared with anyone in years. His love of science fiction movies, how he missed cooking, something he used to do before his life got too busy, how he sometimes felt like he was living someone else's life. He was careful not to mention the money, the companies, The fact that his face had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. For the first time in years, he was just David. Not David Chen, billionaire entrepreneur. Just David. A guy eating catfish and talking to a beautiful, smart woman who seemed to actually care about what he had to say. "I should probably get going," Keisha said eventually, glancing at her phone. Early class tomorrow. David felt panic rise in his chest. He didn't want this to end. He didn't want to go back to his hotel room, back to his world where everyone wanted something from him. Would it be okay if I got your number?"
Maybe we could talk again sometime.
Keisha smiled and David realized he was holding his breath. "I'd like that," she said, pulling out her phone. "But fair warning, I'm pretty busy with school. And I don't really do the whole fancy dinner thing. I'm more of a coffee and conversation type of person." "That sounds perfect," David said, and meant it. As he watched her walk out into the rain, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope for a business deal or a successful launch, but hope for something real. Something that had nothing to do with money or success or any of the things that had consumed his life for so long. He didn't know that Keisha was walking to the bus stop because her car had broken down last week and she couldn't afford to fix it. He didn't know that she'd been living on peanut butter sandwiches for 3 days to save money for textbooks. He didn't know that her simple act of kindness, asking a lonely stranger if he wanted company, came from her own understanding of what it felt like to eat alone. All he knew was that for the first time in months, he was looking forward to tomorrow. David stared at his phone for the 3rd time that morning, reading Keisha's text message again. "Hope you made it back to your hotel okay last night. Thanks for the company. It was nice to talk to someone real for a change. Someone real." The words hit him harder than they should have. If she only knew how fake his whole life had become. Board meetings where everyone agreed with him because of his money. Friends who only called when they needed investors for their startups. Even his ex-wife had admitted during the divorce that she'd married his bank account, not him. He was supposed to be in meetings all day, but David found himself canceling everything. Instead, he sat in his hotel room and typed out a dozen different responses to Keisha, deleting each one. What could he say? That talking to her had been the best part of his week? That he'd slept better last night than he had in months? Finally, he kept it simple. "It was nice for me, too. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime before I head back to California." Her response came an hour later. "I'd love that, but I should warn you, I'm kind of broke right now. Student life, you know? So it'll have to be the cheap place on campus." David's first instinct was to offer to pay to take her somewhere nice. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of how natural their conversation had been, how she'd treated him like a regular person. He didn't want to ruin that. "Cheap coffee sounds perfect. I hear it tastes better when you're in good company anyway." They met the next afternoon at a small cafe near the university. David got there early and watched Keisha walk in, her backpack heavy with books, her face lighting up when she saw him. She ordered a small black coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu, and David followed her lead. "So tell me more about this community center idea," David said as they settled into a corner booth with worn cushions and a wobbly table. Keisha's eyes lit up. "You really want to hear about it?" "I really do." For the next hour, she painted a picture that made David's chest tight with something he couldn't name. She talked about kids who had nowhere to go after school, teenagers who needed job training, families who couldn't afford tutoring for their children. Her voice got excited when she described computer classes for seniors, cooking lessons for single parents, a safe space where everyone was welcome. "The thing is," she said, stirring her coffee, "most people see poor communities and think they need saving. But that's not true. These communities are full of smart, talented, hardworking people. They just need opportunities. They need someone to believe in them." David thought about all the charity galas he'd attended, writing checks while eating expensive food and congratulating himself for being generous. Had he ever actually talked to the people he was supposedly helping? Had he ever asked what they actually needed? "How much would something like that cost?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Keisha laughed, but there was sadness in it. "More than I'll ever have. The building alone would be hundreds of thousands. Then equipment, staff, programs. Sometimes I think I'm just dreaming." "Dreams are important," David said quietly. "They're what keep us human." Something in his voice made Keisha look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." "What's your dream, David?" The question caught him off guard. What was his dream?
He'd achieved everything he'd thought he wanted.
Money, success, recognition. But sitting here with Keisha, he realized those things felt empty. I used to dream about changing the world through technology, he said slowly, making life better for people. But somewhere along the way, I think I lost sight of the people part. It's not too late, Keisha said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Dreams don't have expiration dates. Her touch sent electricity through David's arm, but it was more than physical. It was the first time in years someone had touched him with genuine affection, not because they wanted something from him. They talked until the cafe started closing around them. Keisha told him about growing up with a single mom who worked 3 jobs, about being the first person in her family to go to college, about professors who told her social work wouldn't pay the bills, but she was doing it anyway. David found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. How lonely it got at the top, how he sometimes missed being hungry, missed having something to work toward, how his mother had been the only person who treated him the same before and after he got rich, and how lost he felt without her. She sounds like she was an amazing woman, Keisha said when he finished talking about his mom. She was. She used to say that money was like water. It could nourish things or it could drown them, depending on how you used it. Smart lady. They exchanged numbers again, and this time David saved her contact as just Keisha, not with all the formal titles and company information he usually included. Over the next 2 weeks, they texted every day. Good morning messages, random thoughts, pictures of interesting things they saw. David found himself looking forward to her messages more than any business call or meeting. Keisha told him about her struggles with her thesis, about professors who challenged her, about her part-time job at a community organization that barely paid but gave her experience. David told her about his love of old movies, about learning to cook during the pandemic, about missing his mom's Sunday dinners. Neither of them called it dating, but David felt more connected to Keisha through their text conversations than he had to his ex-wife during their entire marriage. One evening, Keisha's messages stopped coming. David waited, checking his phone obsessively. Finally, around midnight, she texted, "Sorry for going quiet. Had some bad news today about school." David called immediately. "What happened?" "Financial aid got cut," Keisha said, and he could hear tears in her voice. "Budget cuts at the state level. They're telling me I need to come up with $15,000 by next month or I can't finish my degree." David's heart broke for her, but part of him also felt relief. This was something he could fix. This was a problem money could solve. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "Loans, scholarships, something." "I've tried everything," Keisha said. "My credit's not good enough for private loans, and I don't have family who can co-sign. I'm going to have to drop out, David. After everything, I'm going to have to quit when I'm just 1 semester away from finishing." Every instinct David had screamed at him to fix this. He could transfer the money tonight. $15,000 was nothing to him, less than he spent on a single business dinner. But how could he do it without revealing who he really was? And once she knew about his money, would everything change between them? "Don't give up yet," he said finally. "Sometimes solutions come from unexpected places." "You're sweet," Keisha said, and he could hear her smiling through the tears. "I don't know what I did to deserve a friend like you, but I'm grateful for it. A friend." The word hit David like a punch to the chest, but not in a bad way. When was the last time someone had called him a friend and meant it? When was the last time he'd cared about someone else's problems more than his own? After they hung up, David sat in his hotel room and stared out at the Atlanta skyline. He'd built an empire, but he'd never felt more powerless in his life. He had the ability to solve Keisha's problem with a single phone call, but doing so might destroy the most real relationship he'd had in years. For the first time since he'd become wealthy, David Chen understood that some problems couldn't be solved with money. Some things were too important to risk losing. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the pain in Keisha's voice when she talked about dropping out of school. $15,000. The amount he spent on a single business lunch. The cost of 1 night at the hotels he usually stayed in. By morning, he'd made his decision. David called his assistant, Patricia, who'd been handling his personal affairs for over a decade. "I need you to make an anonymous donation," he said, "to the University of Georgia's financial aid office, specifically for a student named Keisha Williams in the social work master's program." "How much?" Patricia asked, not even questioning the request. She'd handled stranger things for him. 15,000. Make it look like it's coming from a need-based scholarship fund. I don't want her to know where it came from. Consider it done. David hung up feeling both relief and guilt. He'd solved her problem, but he'd done it by lying, by keeping secrets. The very thing that had destroyed his marriage was now threatening the only genuine relationship he'd had in years. 3 days later, Keisha called him, screaming with joy. "David! You're not going to believe this. I got a call from the financial aid office. Some anonymous donor set up a scholarship fund and I qualified. They're covering everything." David forced himself to sound surprised. "That's incredible. You must have impressed someone with your application. I can't believe it. I was ready to pack up and go home, and now I can finish my degree. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream." "You deserve it," David said, and meant it. "You're going to change the world, Keisha." "I want to celebrate," she said. "Are you still in town? Can we get dinner tonight? Somewhere nice this time. I know it's silly to spend money when I just got out of debt, but I feel like I need to mark this moment somehow." David's heart sank. He'd flown back to California the day before, but he hadn't told her yet. He'd been putting off the conversation because he didn't want to explain why he was leaving so suddenly. "I'm actually back in California," he said. "Work stuff came up." There was a pause. "Oh, when did you leave?" "Yesterday." Another pause, longer this time. "You didn't mention you were leaving." David heard the hurt in her voice and hated himself for it. "It was last minute. I'm sorry, I should have said something." "It's okay," Keisha said, but her voice was different now. Cooler. "I guess I just thought, never mind. Thanks for being happy for me about the scholarship." After she hung up, David stared at his phone and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Back in his Malibu house, David tried to fall back into his normal routine. Board meetings, investor calls, product launches, but everything felt hollow. His assistant brought him reports about his charitable foundation's latest grants, and all he could think about was how impersonal it all was. Numbers on spreadsheets, tax write-offs. Nothing like the light in Keisha's eyes when she talked about helping people. They still texted, but less frequently. Keisha was busy with her final semester, and David couldn't shake the feeling that she was pulling away. Her messages were friendly but distant. She stopped sharing the small details of her day that he'd grown to love. 2 weeks after the scholarship, David was in his home office when Patricia knocked on his door. "Sir, there's been a development with the donation you made." David looked up from his laptop. "What kind of development?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "The student Keisha Williams. She's been asking questions about the scholarship. The university contacted us because she's been persistent about wanting to thank the donor personally." David's blood went cold. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. But sir, she's smart. She's been researching when the scholarship fund was established, cross-referencing it with her timeline of need. I think she's starting to put pieces together." That evening, David's phone rang. Keisha's name appeared on the screen and his heart hammered as he answered. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Okay. About what?" "About the scholarship. About you. About why a need-based financial aid fund was created exactly 3 days after I told you I couldn't afford to finish school." David closed his eyes. "Keisha. I spent all day in the library, David. Did you know you can research charitable donations if you know where to look? Amazing what you can find about shell companies and holding corporations when you're motivated. Can I explain? I think you better." David had rehearsed this conversation in his head 100 times, but now that it was happening, all his prepared words disappeared. "My full name is David Chen," he said quietly. "I own 3 technology companies. The scholarship money came from me." Silence stretched between them for so long that David wondered if she'd hung up. "How much?" she finally asked. "How much what? How much are you worth, David? Because I'm guessing it's not the few million I found in my initial search." David's throat felt tight. "More than that. How much more?" "Does it matter?" "It matters because I need to know if I'm a charity case to you or something else." "How much, David?" Forbes estimated it at $2.7 billion last year. The silence this time was deafening. "Billion," Keisha repeated, her voice flat. "With a B, yes. And you let me buy you cheap coffee. You let me worry about $15,000 while you probably spend more than that on lunch. It wasn't like that. What was it like then? Was this some kind of experiment? Rich guy plays normal to see how the poor people live? No. The word came out sharper than David intended. Keisha, meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in years. You treated me like a person, not like a bank account. Do you have any idea how rare that is? So you lied to me. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, David, or do I call you Mr. Chen now? The pain in her voice was worse than anger would have been. You want to know what hurts the most? She continued. It's not the money. It's not even the lying. It's that you thought so little of me that you believed I couldn't handle the truth. You made decisions about my life without asking me. You took away my choice. I was trying to help. By treating me like a child. By making me feel grateful for something that cost you nothing. David felt like he was drowning. What was I supposed to do? Let you drop out when I could prevent it? You were supposed to trust me enough to be honest. You were supposed to treat me like an equal instead of someone to be managed. You are my equal. Keisha laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, David, I'm not. I can't be. You live in a world where $15,000 is nothing, and I live in a world where it's everything. We were never equal, and you knew that from the beginning. That doesn't matter to me, but it should matter to you. It has to matter because it matters to me. David sat in his expensive house, surrounded by everything money could buy, and felt poorer than he ever had in his life. I care about you, he said desperately. These past few weeks, getting to know you, it's been the most real thing in my life. How can it be real when it's built on lies? Not lies, just incomplete truth. David, I need time to think. I need to figure out what any of this means. I can't talk to you right now. Keisha, please. But the line was already dead. David stared at his phone for a long time, watching Keisha's name fade from the screen. Outside his window, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, beautiful and cold. He'd built an empire, but he'd never felt smaller in his life. 3 weeks passed without a word from Keisha. David threw himself into work, flying between San Francisco, Seattle, and New York for meetings that used to matter to him. But every success felt empty. Every business triumph reminded him of what he'd lost. His assistant Patricia watched him with growing concern as he worked 18-hour days and barely ate. She'd seen him through the divorce, through his mother's death, but this was different. This time he seemed to be disappearing into himself. Sir, she said one Friday afternoon, setting a cup of coffee on his desk, perhaps you should take a vacation. You haven't taken time off in months. I'm fine, David said without looking up from his laptop. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? David couldn't remember. I said I'm fine, Patricia, but he wasn't fine, and they both knew it. That evening, David made a decision that his rational mind told him was stupid. He booked a flight to Atlanta. He told himself he wasn't going to see Keisha. He was just going to check on her from a distance, make sure she was okay. Maybe walk past the university campus, see if he could catch a glimpse of her. It was stalker behavior, and he knew it, but he couldn't stop himself. David landed in Atlanta on a Saturday morning and checked into the same hotel where he'd stayed before. The city looked different now, grayer somehow. Or maybe that was just his mood. He spent the day driving around aimlessly past the university, past Mama Rose's kitchen where they'd first met. He couldn't bring himself to go inside. What would he say if he saw her? How could he explain showing up unannounced when she'd asked for space? Sunday morning, David was sitting in his hotel room staring at his phone when it rang. Unknown Atlanta number. Hello? Is this David Chen? The voice was unfamiliar. Male, young. Yes, who is this? My name is Tony Williams. I'm Keisha's cousin. She doesn't know I'm calling you. David sat up straight. Is she okay? That depends on how you define okay. Look, man, I don't know what happened between you two, but she's been miserable for weeks. Won't talk about it. Won't explain why she cries when she thinks nobody's looking. David's chest tightened. I didn't mean to hurt her. Maybe not. But you did. The thing is, I've never seen my cousin care about someone the way she cares about you. And I've never seen her this torn up either. She told you about me. She told me enough. About some guy she met who made her feel understood for the first time in years. About how he disappeared without explanation. About how she found out he'd been lying to her the whole time. It's complicated, David said lamely. Everything's complicated when money's involved. Look, I'm not calling to take sides. I'm calling because Keisha's at the community center where she volunteers, and she's been there since 6 this morning trying to work herself to death. Again. What community center? Tony gave him an address. I'm not saying you should show up. I'm just saying that if someone wanted to find her, that's where she'd be. The line went dead, leaving David staring at his phone. He could fly home, pretend this conversation never happened, and let Keisha move on with her life. It would be the safe thing to do. The respectful thing. Instead, he got in his rental car and drove to the address Tony had given him. The East Side Community Center was nothing like David had imagined. It was a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that had seen better days, with cracked concrete and broken windows patched with cardboard. A hand-painted sign hung crooked by the front door. David parked across the street and sat in his car for 10 minutes, gathering courage. Through the windows, he could see people moving around inside, kids playing basketball on a makeshift court, elderly people sitting around tables, a woman who might have been Keisha talking to a group of teenagers. Finally, David got out of the car and walked to the front door. The inside of the center was warm and chaotic. The basketball game had gotten louder, and somewhere a baby was crying. The smell of something cooking drifted from what must have been a kitchen. It was everything David's world wasn't: messy, real, alive. "Can I help you?" David turned to find an older black man looking at him suspiciously. He was wearing a volunteer t-shirt and had the protective stance of someone who'd appointed himself guardian of this place. "I'm looking for Keisha Williams," David said. "And you are?" "David, I'm a friend of hers." The man's expression didn't change. "She expecting you?" "No." "Then maybe you should call first." "Please," David said. "I just need 5 minutes. I came from California." Something in his voice must have convinced the man because his expression softened slightly. "She's in the back room with the teenagers, working on college applications. But I'm warning you, she's had a rough few weeks. You heard her and you'll answer to me." David nodded and followed the man's directions to a small room at the back of the center. Through the open door, he could see Keisha sitting at a table with 3 teenagers, helping them fill out paperwork. She looked tired, thinner than he remembered, but still beautiful. One of the teenagers noticed him first. "Miss Keisha, there's someone here to see you." Keisha looked up and the color drained from her face when she saw David standing in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk, please?" The teenagers were looking back and forth between them like they were watching a tennis match. Keisha seemed to remember where she was and forced a smile. "Why don't you guys take a break? We'll finish these applications in a few minutes." The teenagers left reluctantly, clearly hoping for drama. Keisha stood up slowly, her hands shaking slightly. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know, but I couldn't stay away. David, I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Keisha's eyes filled with tears. "Don't," she said. "Don't make this harder than it already is. It's true. I've been miserable for 3 weeks because I'm in love with you and I ruined everything. You lied to me." "Yes, I did, and I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." Keisha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why? Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning?" David stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Because I was scared. Because every relationship I've ever had has been about my money. Because for the first time in years, someone looked at me and saw just David, not David Chen, the billionaire. So you decided for both of us that I couldn't handle it. Yes, and that was wrong. I took away your choice, and I'm sorry." Keisha sat back down heavily. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out that someone you care about thinks so little of you, that they believe you can't handle the truth?" "I don't think little of you. I think you're the strongest, smartest, most incredible person I've ever met." "Then why didn't you trust me?" David sat down across from her, careful to keep some distance between them. "Because I was a coward. Because I'd rather have a few weeks of something real with you than risk losing you immediately. You lost me anyway." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the community center around them. Kids laughing, adults talking, life happening in all its messy glory. "This place," David said finally, looking around the small room with its mismatched furniture and inspirational posters. "It's what you were talking about, isn't it?" "Your dream," Keisha nodded. "It's not much, but it's something. We help about 50 families a week. Tutoring, job training, food assistance. It's exactly what I want to do, just on a smaller scale than I'd hoped." "It's perfect," David said, and meant it. "It's underfunded and understaffed and falling apart," Keisha said with a sad smile. "But yeah, it's perfect." David looked at her across the table, this woman who had turned his world upside down without even trying. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I hurt you, and I know saying sorry doesn't fix that. But Keisha, these past 3 weeks without you have been the worst of my life. Not because I'm used to getting what I want, but because losing you made me realize what actually matters. What matters, David? You. This. Real connections with real people doing real work that actually helps. Everything I thought I wanted before I met you was just noise. Keisha was crying again, and David wanted nothing more than to reach across the table and hold her hand. But he stayed where he was. I don't know how to trust you again, she whispered. Then let me show you, David said. Give me a chance to prove that I can be the man you believed I was in that restaurant. Not the billionaire, just David. How? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out, if you'll let me. Keisha looked at him for a long time, studying his face like she was trying to read his soul. One condition, she said finally. Anything. No more secrets. No more protecting me from information I deserve to have. No more making decisions about my life without asking me first. I promise. And if we do this, if we try again, it has to be as equals. I won't be your charity case or your project. I won't be the poor girl you rescued. You were never that, David said fiercely. You were the person who rescued me. For the first time since he'd walked into the room, Keisha smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. We're going to have to start over, she said. All the way over. No assumptions, no shortcuts. Just two people getting to know each other honestly. I'd like that, David said. Hi, I'm David Chen. I'm a billionaire with trust issues and a tendency to solve problems with money instead of communication. I also happen to be completely in love with you. Despite everything, Keisha laughed. Hi, David, I'm Keisha Williams. I'm a broke graduate student with abandonment issues and a tendency to assume the worst about people's motives. I also happen to be completely in love with you, too. And for the first time in 3 weeks, David felt like he could breathe again. 6 months later, David was learning to live differently. Not just dating differently, but living differently in every way that mattered. He'd moved to Atlanta, renting a modest apartment downtown instead of buying some mansion in the suburbs. His companies were still headquartered in California, but modern technology meant he could work from anywhere. More importantly, he'd started delegating more, trusting his team to handle the day-to-day operations while he focused on the bigger picture. The bigger picture, these days, involves spending 3 afternoons a week at the Eastside Community Center. David, can you help me with this math problem? Asked Jasmine, a 15-year-old who was working on her geometry homework. Sure thing, David said, pulling up a chair next to her. What are we dealing with? 6 months ago, David would never have imagined that helping a teenager with her math homework could be more satisfying than closing $1 million deal. But here he was, watching Jasmine's face light up when she finally understood how to calculate the area of a triangle, and feeling more accomplished than he had in years. You're getting good at this teaching thing, said Keisha, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee from the center's ancient coffee maker. I have a good supervisor, David said, accepting the coffee gratefully, though I think Mrs. Patterson still doesn't trust me around the kitchen. Can you blame her? Remember what happened when you tried to help with the soup last week? David grimaced. He'd somehow managed to burn soup. Soup. It was still a mystery to him how that was even possible. I'm better with technology, he admitted. That was an understatement. Over the past 6 months, David had been quietly revolutionizing the center's operations. Not with flashy donations or grand gestures, but with practical improvements that Keisha and the other staff had requested. A new computer lab for job training, updated software for tracking client services, a secure website where people could sign up for programs online. Every change had been discussed with the center's board, proposed through proper channels, and implemented with input from the people who actually worked there. David was learning that throwing money at problems wasn't nearly as effective as listening to people who understood those problems intimately. Earth to David, Keisha said, waving her hand in front of his face. You're thinking too hard again. Just thinking about how different this is from what I used to do, David said. Different good or different bad? Different amazing. Keisha smiled and kissed his cheek, a simple gesture that still made David's heart skip. Come on, Romeo, we've got a meeting with the city planning committee in an hour. The meeting was about the center's expansion plans. After months of careful planning and community input, They'd identified a larger building 2 blocks away that could serve twice as many families. The funding was complicated, involving city grants, private donations, and a loan that David had helped secure through his connections. But the most important part wasn't the money. It was the community support they'd built over months of town halls and neighborhood meetings. Unlike David's previous charitable efforts, this wasn't something being imposed from the outside. It was something the community had asked for, planned for, and would help run. Nervous? Keisha asked as they walked into City Hall. Terrified, David admitted. What if they say no? Then we'll try again. Or we'll find another way. That's how community organizing works, David. It's not about getting everything you want immediately. It's about building relationships and trust over time. David was still learning this lesson. 6 months ago, if he'd wanted something from the city, he would have made a few phone calls, probably donated to someone's campaign, and gotten it done quickly. Now he was learning to work within systems, to build consensus, to let other people take the lead. The meeting went better than expected. The planning committee approved their proposal, contingent on a few minor modifications to their budget. As they walked out of City Hall, David felt the same rush he used to get from closing major business deals. Celebratory dinner? He suggested, absolutely. But nowhere fancy. I'm thinking tacos, David laughed. You know I can afford better than tacos, right? I know you can afford anything, Keisha said, taking his arm. But I also know that some of our best conversations happen in tiny restaurants with plastic chairs. She was right. Over the past 6 months, they'd done most of their dates at small local places. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. David was discovering that intimacy had nothing to do with how much money you spent and everything, to do with how present you were with the person you were with. They ended up at a hole-in-the-wall taco place that Keisha loved, sitting at a rickety table and sharing a plate of the best street tacos David had ever tasted. So what's next? Keisha asked, stealing one of his tacos. Well, if the expansion goes through, we'll need to hire more staff. I was thinking we could create a social work internship program, partner with some of the universities in the area. That's not what I meant, Keisha said, giving him a look. David put down his taco. What did you mean? I meant what's next for us. We've been taking things slow, rebuilding trust, figuring out how to be together honestly, and that's been good. But David, it's been 6 months. I'm ready for the next step. David's heart started racing. What kind of next step? The kind where we stop pretending this is casual. The kind where we talk about the future instead of just living day by day. David reached across the table and took her hand. I've been waiting for you to bring this up. Have you? Keisha, I want everything with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build something real together, not just at the community center, but in our lives. I want to marry you someday if you'll have me. Keisha's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Someday? How about soon? How about as soon as you're ready? I'm ready now, David. I've been ready for weeks. I was just waiting for you to catch up. David laughed and brought her hand to his lips. I love you, Keisha Williams. I love your passion and your intelligence and your terrible taste in coffee. Hey, the community center coffee isn't that bad. It's terrible, and you know it. But I love that you drink it anyway because that's what's available. I love you too, Keisha said softly. I love that you've learned to be patient. I love that you listen more than you talk now. I love that you've figured out how to use your privilege to lift people up instead of just writing checks. I'm still learning, David said. Every day. We're both still learning. That's what makes it good. They finished their tacos and walked back to David's apartment, holding hands and making plans. Not grand expensive plans, but real ones. Where they wanted to live after they got married. How many kids they wanted. Whether David should start a foundation focused on community development or keep working within existing organizations. I have something to tell you, Keisha said as they settled onto David's couch. Should I be worried? No, but it's big news. I got offered a job today. David sat up straighter. Where? The city's Department of Social Services. They want me to head up a new community development program. It would mean working with neighborhoods all over Atlanta, not just our center. That's incredible. It's exactly what you've been working toward. It is. And David, they offered me the job because of the work we've done together at the center. Our expansion project got their attention. They want to replicate it in other neighborhoods. David felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for Keisha. You're going to change this whole city. We're going to change it. If you want to be part of it. What do you mean? I mean they're creating a position for a technology and innovation coordinator. Someone who understands both business and community needs. Someone who can help neighborhoods access resources without losing their autonomy. David stared at her. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to do what you've been doing at our center, but on a much bigger scale. The pay is terrible compared to what you're used to, but the impact could be incredible. You want me to leave my companies? I want you to choose what makes you happy. Your businesses will survive without you running them day to day. You've built good teams, David. Trust them. David thought about his life 6 months ago. The endless meetings, the constant pressure, the loneliness despite being surrounded by people. Then he thought about this afternoon, helping Jasmine with her math homework, seeing her face light up with understanding. I don't need to think about it, he said. Yes. Yes to the job or yes to everything? Yes to everything. Yes to the job. Yes to building a life together. Yes to figuring out how to use money and privilege responsibly. Yes to all of it. Keisha kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. So what happens now? David asked when they broke apart. Now we get to work. Real work, David. The kind that changes lives. Starting when? Starting now. David looked around his simple apartment, thinking about the community center, about Jasmine and her math homework, about Keisha and her dreams of changing the world one neighborhood at a time. 6 months ago, he'd been one of the richest men in America, and one of the loneliest. Now he was about to take a massive pay cut to work for the city of Atlanta, and he'd never been happier in his life. You know what's funny? He said to Keisha. What? I spent years trying to figure out how to buy happiness. Turns out you can't buy it. You can only build it one relationship at a time. Very philosophical, Mr. Chen. I learned from the best, Ms. Williams. Outside their window, Atlanta hummed with the sounds of evening. Cars on the street, people talking on their porches, kids playing in the distance. It was the sound of community, of people building lives together. And for the first time in his adult life, David Chen felt like he was truly part of something bigger than himself. Money, he'd learned, wasn't the root of all evil. But it wasn't the root of all good either. It was just a tool, and like any tool, its value came from how you used it and who you chose to build with. David Chen was finally ready to build something that mattered.